Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We are ready to continue. So, the next panel will concern responding to disinformation. My name is Nick Yurlov. I'm a senior legal counsel at Truth Hounds, a Ukrainian NGO which is documenting and investigating war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. And today with me on the panel, I have my most distinguished colleagues, Alexandra Busky, an advocacy and communication manager from the White Helmets, Ruslan Deynichenko, executive director at Stop Fake, Taras Moklak, a senior analyst at Center for Defense Reforms, and Nathalie Vogel, senior fellow at the Institute of World Politics, correct? This panel will discuss the ways to respond to disinformation, and will build up the excellent discussion that we've had just an hour ago on the ways that disinformation works. So the common roots and aspects of disinformation, as well as opportunities for fighting these, including through cross-fertilization between the two contexts, and the collection and use of accurate data, including for use in advocacy and the pursuit of accountability, as well as accurate and context-sensitive reporting and investigative journalism. So we all know that to defeat the enemy, the first thing that we need to do is to identify it. This is something that we just started discussing previously. But how to actually beat the enemy that is plaguing the democratic discourse in so many countries. So with that, do we have Alexandra online? Yep. So with that, I would like to pass the word to Alexandra Busky. Please tell us about your work and what are your opinions on the subject. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm sorry I can't be there in person, but thank you for inviting the White Helmets to this discussion. So just a little bit of background about the White Helmets, because it's important to understand where we're coming from. The White Helmets began as groups of volunteers filling the gaps in essential public services that were being withdrawn by the Syrian regime. Emergency services like search and rescue, firefighting, and ambulance services. Originally, we were separate groups of organized volunteers, but we came together in 2014, and we're now 3,000 volunteers, one of the largest humanitarian providers in northwest Syria. As first responders to military attacks, we're also the witnesses of war crimes and crimes against humanity, and we've worked from the very beginning to document the incidents that we respond to support international investigations into atrocities. And this is a key part of our identity as humanitarians. We believe that we have a moral obligation to speak the truth, to bear witness, and to work towards justice and accountability. As you know, from the very beginning, the regime has tried to distort the truth and sow distrust about what's happening on the ground. And the narratives we saw in Syria are very similar to those that we've been seeing in Ukraine. But the volume of disinformation really ramped up in 2015 with the engagement of Russia in Syria. And the White Helmets became victims of an extraordinary systematic disinformation campaign. At first, we thought people were genuinely misled, and we tried to engage with them and correct them. No, that's not us. That's not what we do. But it became very clear very quickly that this was more organized. An analysis last year by the Institute of Strategic Dialogue, which was published in a report by the Syria campaign, found that just over 45% of all posts sharing disinformation on Twitter were about the White Helmets between 2015 and 2021. That's an enormous amount of disinformation, and a small humanitarian organization based on volunteerism is not in a position to be able to respond to this. The disinformation in general sought to undermine the legitimacy of our work, cast doubt on the credibility of our documentation. And this caused real world harm. We're looking at disinformation that legitimized the targeting of our volunteers, we've lost more than 238 volunteers to military attacks, most of whom were targeted in double tap attacks. 120 of our centers have been attacked deliberately, and we've lost at least 14 ambulances, 14 fire trucks to deliberate attacks. I can go more into real world harm, maybe in the next question, but if you're wanting to ask more about how to deal with it, over the years we've learned, as I said, initially we thought we would respond directly to those spreading disinformation, but we've obviously learned never to respond, non-engagement. We can never ever dream to have the same level of resources as those leading these campaigns. But we have invested in developing a very reliable reporting team. So we have a media department, a media engagement department that has more than 100 media officers on the ground, and they follow our volunteers to whichever incident or operation that they're attending and document everything that's taking place. And this isn't just about the quantity of like the reach of our social media accounts or the number of mentions that we get in the media, but it's also about the reliability of the information and the legitimacy of the voice of the White Helmets as viewed by trustworthy news sources. So news sources like Reuters and AFP, they wait for us to confirm whether or not these attacks have taken place and what their impact is. This level of trust is hugely important, and we've built it over many years of effort. But it's also a huge burden of responsibility. We have to be very, very careful, very cautious, validate everything, to provide a narrative of events that allows people to be able to see what the truth is of what's happening in Syria. Another way that we respond in a way is to support research that seeks to uncover the patterns and impact of disinformation. And then we also engage in direct engagement with governments, so advocacy. We often hear that people hear about the White Helmets, but never directly from the White Helmets. And so we try to ensure that we're engaging with a variety of different governments, a variety of different states in different international fora, so that they can hear directly from White Helmets volunteers on the ground about what it is that we're doing, to be able to, get in front of people as much as possible and show the narrative of what we experience. So that's just a couple of ways that we respond, but I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. And it's hard for me to imagine what you have lived through, since Russians, which are known to have quite extensive offensive capabilities in information warfare, have partnered with Syrians in this concerted attack to discredit your organization. So perhaps what is the reason of this choice of your organization as target would be my question.
Yes, thank you. So as I said, as first responders, we're also the witnesses. And so when you've committed a crime and you want to hide it, who is it that you target? You target the witnesses. That's one of the main reasons. So that's targeting through military attack, direct military attacks, but also by undermining the credibility of the work that we do, casting doubt and sowing confusion about who it is we are and what it is that we stand for. Another reason I would say is that the narrative around Syria has kind of pushed people into two camps. You're either pro-regime or you're a terrorist. And the desire for the disinformation was really to try to cut out the middle ground, cut out that moderate voice. The White Helmets volunteers are an example of moderate civil society attempting to improve the lives of the communities in which they live and work. It's very, very simple, but it seems easier to create a division between what types of people are in Syria, whether are you regime or are you a terrorist? The disinformation was really trying to get rid of that middle ground and to make it more difficult for policymakers and the public in Western countries to really understand who it is that they can support, how they can engage, and how they can help protect civilians in that situation.
Thank you. And So if I understood correctly, that it is this creation of this false dichotomy which has been the main purpose of the information operations, either pro-regime or pro-terrorist. But as you, the representative of this moderate middle ground, and have your responses to the information operations been successful? Did you manage to maintain this neutral ground despite the concerted operations against you?
I think so. It's hard to tell what the counterfactual would be, but we're still here. It's going to be 10 years that we've been operating. We're still a trusted source of information for credible news agencies, as I said, like Reuters and AFP. When there is an attack, it's our numbers that are usually used for the number of victims that are attacked. People want to hear from the white helmets in the media a lot. So I would say that we have cultivated a reputation for being reliable, and the work itself, the work of the volunteers itself, the core work of the volunteers. The media work is really just something that we do to demonstrate what it is we do. But the work itself that the volunteers is doing speaks for itself. You saw during the earthquake response that it was the white helmets who were front and center in that early part of the response. And the trust that we have with the communities that we serve is a very important part of our legitimacy.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. And separate thank you for your great work, for what you're doing in the interest of humanity. I will now pass the floor to the Executive Director at Stop Fake, Ruslan Deinichenko. The organization is known for its tremendous effort in countering Russian disinformation, and we would love to hear about your experience in this regard. Please.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the invitation to speak here at the conference, and also I'd like to thank governments and taxpayers of those countries who support Ukraine during this very difficult period of time. Our organization identified our enemy almost 10 years ago, and it was Russian disinformation and propaganda machine. We saw how Kremlin-sponsored disinformation machine produces and disseminates thousands of fakes, and so this very small team from the Kyiv Mohyla Academy decided to do something with that, and we started with fact checks. So we just debunked disinformation and lies of Russian propaganda. Mostly our focus was on Russian federal TV networks. So every time we saw something suspicious, we tried to check it and to find the truth. And if we had enough evidence to prove that this is not true, we just published an article and informed our readers that what was wrong with this information. Of course, many times we've heard that it's not effective, that fact-checking doesn't work. And but let me remind you that in 2014, not all the Ukrainians supported the ban on Russian TV networks here in Ukraine. And we supplied our findings to the regulators, to our to the government, and when decision to ban these TV networks was made, and not just in Ukraine, but other foreign governments and our partners, they said, oh, this is censorship, this is not about democracy. People have to decide themselves who is right, who is wrong, and they need to have opinion of Russia and opinion of Ukrainian government. So I think that we proved, and I mean not just we as a Stop Fake organization, but a lot of our partners who work in the same direction. So we proved that Russian media, it's not about informing people, it's about disinforming. Since 2014, March of 2014, we have hundreds of thousands of examples how Russia used disinformation to reach their goals, basically. So again, many times we've been asked who needs another 1,000 evidences of them lying, and we think it's important to on a daily basis to monitor Russian media and to fill this collection of their fakes and our debunks, because first of all, it's just not we informing people. We have already passed our collection as an evidence to Ukrainian police, and there is an investigation, and we hope that one day those who produce and disseminate disinformation on an industrial scale, they will be prosecuted and punished, not just in Ukrainian courts, but in, we hope, international courts either. And also we think it's very important not just to inform people and to, our citizens that Russia always lies and do not trust Russian media, and with examples. I think it's very important, of course, that the researchers of the future, historians, will have facts when they write history of nowadays, and they will the future history about today's events will not be based on false facts or disinformation that Russia produced. Very often we just monitor Russian media, just watching Russian TV. We have predicted some events, and in 2014, when I worked on the very first article for our website about floods of Ukrainian refugees in Russia, I called to Federal Migration Service of Russia, and they answered me that there is no Ukrainian refugees in Russia. There were just 5 phone calls from Ukrainian citizens in March of 2014. But when when I spoke with the lady from Federal Migration Service, she told me, but we have received an order from Kremlin to prepare these places for refugees, and we have already bought everything for them, beds, we bought tents, and so on and so on. So at least 2 months before events in Donbass, they have already purchased everything for Ukrainian refugees. There were no refugees, but they purchased everything for them. And when in April of 2014, these events in Donbass happened in Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, and Donetsk, and other cities of Donbass, they were prepared, and the public opinion in Russia was prepared. Unfortunately, we were not prepared in the right way. But again, very often the information in our findings we send to Ukrainian diplomats, Ukrainian government officials, informing them about what's going on Russian TV, and it might be interesting for them either. Well, and of course, every time, not every time, but very often when we, for example, when we saw and debunked fakes on 3 Ukrainian TV networks which belong to Mr. Medvedchuk, who is who is a close friend of Putin. We just not debunked their fakes, but we sent our findings, our analysis to Ukrainian regulator, National Council. So when it was questioned to revoke their licenses or not, they had enough evidence to do the right decision. So again, what we do, I think it's a very small thing, but I think it's an important thing, and in conjunction with other efforts, it might be very useful and might be very effective. So that's what we do have been doing for 10 years, and we hope to do it to make our profession cleaner and our world more secure, I would say.
Thank you very much, Ruslan. Indeed, Stop Fake has been like a staple of the informational resistance to Russian disinformation and influence operations in Ukraine for a long time. I would like to ask, how do you evaluate the effectiveness of your efforts to debunk the Russian disinformation? Do you have any metrics, any KPIs? Because it's quite hard in the information sphere to understand what is the real impact of a certain Facebook, Twitter post or TV program.
Well, just a few examples, and the most recent research I saw demonstrated that only between 3 to 5% of Ukrainians trust Russian media. So if suddenly Russian media decide to tell truth and nothing but the truth, no one in Ukraine will trust them. I think I mentioned several examples when with our contribution, some Russian television in 2014 was prohibited here in Ukraine. 1 year later, in 2015, Russian social platforms, they were banned in Ukraine, and we supported that decision, and we lobbied that decision either. Well, based on our findings, Facebook marks disinformation and propaganda on their platforms like Instagram and Facebook. So every month, million of posts are marked as disinformation with our findings. And we see when some Russian propaganda key players see that we mark their lies on Facebook, they start to call their followers, oh, let's go to Telegram. Let's go to Telegram because it's censorship here. So for us, it's just another proof that our efforts are effective. So unfortunately, still Telegram and some other platforms, they are used by Russian propaganda machine to disseminate disinformation. But at least what we see on Facebook, Instagram, and on YouTube, it's much, much better than it used to be many years ago.
Thank you very much. And as a reminder to everyone, if you have Telegram installed on your phones, delete it as soon as possible. Telegram is a Russian application. It has access to your location, to your gallery, to your camera, to your microphone, and it can be used to identify your location by the Russian special services. Please do not use Telegram. And thank you very much for your work, and we hope we'll get to banning Telegram as well in Ukraine one day, once there's the political consensus for it. And with that, I pass the floor to the senior analyst of the Center for Defense Reforms, Taras Moklak. We had a great conversation before the panel about what exactly is disinformation, how it differs from other types of operations. So please provide your insights on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to say first that it's an honor to become a part of the panel with such an honorable representatives of the civil societies of Western countries and Ukraine. So we have got a quite wide picture of what is hybrid warfare, what is the nature of the hybrid warfare. Started from 2022, then 2014, then we spoke today about 2008 and what has happened in Georgia. But to end this story, I would like to say that probably the first influence operation was conducted at the Garden of Eden, when it was said, "Are you sure that the Lord said that to you?" actually. So the purpose, just to end this discussion about the chronology when the influence operations has started actually, so probably it has started at that time actually. But again, I would like to agree with Mr. Sanjay, who provided us with a quite wide perspective about the nature of the hybrid warfare, we do have such a privilege here in Ukraine to have an access to the opened and partially opened KGB archives. And I remember that the KGB general Oleg Kalugin said that the heart and the soul of the Soviet intelligence was the subversion, actually. So the nature of the hybrid warfare, of Russian hybrid warfare today, is the subversion in all areas of our public life. These are the operations which are conducting by the intelligence mostly on all areas on a multi-dimensional level. And I do believe that we have to assess that disinformation not as something separate, but as the only tool of the subversion, because disinformation is an instrument, propaganda is an instrument, fake news are the instrument to subvert. But we speak today precisely about the disinformation, and I would like to provide our dear guests with a few cases, what we faced in the past and what we have been facing maybe even a couple days ago and since the Russian full-scale invasion. But the main thing I would like to emphasize that we are facing the full-scale unconventional aggression from conducted by the Russian Federation, also conducted by China against the West. And the goal is to subvert and to undermine all areas of our public life. But I would like to emphasize this, that to undermine, it's not even the goal, because the final goal, according to the KGB doctrine and according to the modern Russian doctrine, General Gerasimov stated that probably a few times, the final goal is to set up whether it's a friendly regime in a kind of any Western country, or at least to bring to power political parties which are like the nature of which is to destabilize the society, to make each particular country incapable to counter Russian activities in the right way. So just one example, and we spoke about that with Natalie yesterday, of the Soviet disinformation operation. I believe it will help us to feel the difference between disinformation, propaganda, and then I will end up with my personal point of view, how should we deal with disinformation as we speak about the disinformation. Probably at least some of us have heard about such so-called Operation Horovod, the Soviet operation conducted by the KGB. It was the strategic disinformation operation, because there are tactical level and the strategic level. It was the big parade in 1955 in Moscow. The representatives of a number of Western countries, including the US, were invited. They were at the parade, watching the parade. Of course, the representatives of the Western intelligence were at the parade. At that time, Russians had about very few, maybe 5 to 10 heavy jets, heavy, big strategic fighters, those combat jets actually. And what Russians did actually during the parade, they just circled those planes one by another, in order to make Western elites believe that Soviet regime investing funds into building those heavy fighter jets. At that time, Soviet defense industry was pretty focused on the production of the intercontinental ballistic rockets, actually. So the goal was to disinform the Western elites, actually, that Soviets are focused on producing the jets. At that time, they were focused on the rocket program, and as you remember, as the result probably also of this operation, the first man in space in 1961 was the Soviet citizen, actually. So it's just to try to assess the consequences of such a disinformation operation. So As Ladislav Bittman, the deputy head of Czechoslovakian disinformation department, stated, the disinformation manipulates the elites and usually does not go public, but strategic disinformation manipulates it in the way I just told you about. Another very interesting case from our life, I just was thinking about that Ukrainian weaponry in Palestine. And here I will step into countering the disinformation. So probably you have seen, all of us, you have seen that story that Ukrainian weaponry was discovered actually in Palestine. So, but the thing is that the goal of this influence operation, of this disinformation operation, is not to accuse Ukraine in providing Hamas with weaponry. The final goal of this disinformation campaign is to undermine Western military aid to Ukraine. I will provide you with another example, and I will explain why I'm focusing on the final goal. I believe it's a good example as well. You remember that accident in Sweden, in Stockholm, where the far-right activist Rasmus Paludan burned Quran in front of the Turkish agency in Stockholm, actually. The result of this activity was the position of the Turkish president, Recep Erdogan, that Sweden is not welcomed to become a part of NATO. Right after, and that operation, you know, it was paid by Chunk Freak, a guy who has been working for Russia Today for a number of years. And right after that, that guy, Rasmus Paludan, came up and stated that he demands Sweden to be invited to NATO. The same guy who burned the Quran came up and said that this is the disinformation to hide the real intent of the operation with that Quran burning. So why I was telling to you those stories actually? Because it is very important to uncover and expose the narrative. It is very important to uncover and expose the fake news. But speaking about the disinformation and about the approach we should apply to tackle it, when you're having a virus, for instance, of course you can try to deal with the temperature, but your final goal is to deal with the virus. The final intent of the disinformation is the decision made by the government of any another state. The final goal of the disinformation, which is the tool of influence, is the decision made by the leader of any group or organization, but mostly we speak about the government. So to summarize, I believe that speaking on how should we deal with the disinformation, in addition to focusing on narratives, in addition to focusing on fake news, we, I believe, should start countering disinformation from the opposite way. First, we have to define the goal of the disinfo campaign. Not to define the narrative which the campaign consists, because Russians can develop thousands of different narratives, and while we are exposing 10 narratives or 10 fake news, they create 1,000 new fake news, and you're trying to catch the train, which is all the time running, and you can't do that actually. It is important because it's about the resilience of the society, right? But as a practitioners, if we speak about countering disinformation, this is the topic of our panel actually, I would like to sum up with this that, again, I'd like to repeat this. Establishing our response to the disinformation, first we have to define the goal of the disinformation. And we have to understand that disinformation is just a tool. It's not something like unique. It's just a one tool from the very wide toolkit of Russian subversive activities. Defining the final goal, like with this operation with Ukrainian weaponry in Palestine, we understand that the final goal is to undermine actually the military aid to Ukraine. When we understand this, we are able to establish the right approach and the right strategy to counter that disinformation. If we just expose the narrative, which is truth or false, by the way, according to the KGB doctrine, disinformation itself usually operates with partially truth information. So this is very important, actually, seen. But this is my position and my attitude towards the disinformation and on how should we deal with it. Maybe that's it.
Taras, thank you very much. Really insightful overview of the strategies that the disinformation campaigners employ. And the question would then be, when this has real-world consequences, like, for example, in last February, nobody gave us more than 72 hours because everybody believed in this might of the Russian army. I even remember The Economist going on 25th February, something with like Russia's strength and awe, referring to the US Desert Storm operation when they took over the Iraq forces by shock and awe. And that was the this belief in Russian might, which turned out to be bloated and inflated, led to the foreign supporters of Ukraine opting not to give us weapons in advance, with a few exception of like NLAWs and a minor portion of Stingers. How can we move this lack of proper information about Ukraine? What would be the most effective tool for us to get the decision makers the right information and not the inflated images? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I just would like to remind to all of us that the who has informed us that we will have like 72 hours, these are like Western intelligences. So it shows to us that we do have some problems actually with the efficiency of intelligence agencies of our partners actually. So this is no, but it's really serious, right? Because it's about lives. It's not about something else, but it's about like human beings' lives. It's about, yeah. So that's just to highlight that we do have a problem. So you asked a quite wide question, and I do believe, and I will highly appreciate if we can make a kind of a group workshop or something like that to try at least to propose the strategy to respond the challenge you are talking about. So, but I'm afraid that it's not enough to tell the truth about the Ukraine and to tell the truth about what is happening in Ukraine. Again, according to the Soviet approach, the first stage of the first stage of the subversion is ideological subversion, and it's supposed to take about 15 to 20 years. In late 70s, 80s, it was the approach. But COVID, migrant crisis, Russian war against Ukraine has speeded up this first step of the ideological subversion, and the goal of the ideological subversion is demoralization, actually. We have been speaking a lot today about the war fatigue and so on, and we must understand that the problem is even bigger, actually, because last 5 years has speed up this first phase, actually, of the ideological subversion, of demoralization. And if you will come up and tell people the truth, I believe that it won't help, actually, because the post-truth works like your brain is not accepting any kind of truth, but the only facts which prove what you believe in, actually. So that's the problem. If you will come up and tell people the truth, it is a very important part, okay? So I'm not against it, yeah? So it's very important. But I believe that we have to develop a very strategic approach, because the response to the narrative have to be our own story. Not even the counter-narrative, but our own story. It requires the cooperation between the intelligence agencies and the civil society. The civil society is not able to do it on its own, actually. The intelligence agencies are not, it's impossible to do it on their own, because it's a very big land scale of multidimensional subversion activities. You can't trace everything, actually. That's why the combination of the efforts has to be applied. Sorry, I will say it like very frankly, because it's I do believe it. That's how it works, actually. I'm not saying that I will surprise someone here, actually. And that kind of strategy has to be applied not only to tell the truth, but to tell our own story, to make our own influence, which will be aimed to assess our goals, to protect and save the current world-based order. Because at that time, the goal was to bring a communist party to power all across the world. Far right, far left, these are new communist party. And Russians doesn't care, actually. It will be the communist party or it will be AfD, for instance, in Germany. The main goal is to bring, and the final goal of disinformation is to bring to power political parties, at least who will be maybe, if not control, like Yanukovych regime, for instance, here in Ukraine, but loyal to the Russian government. If not loyal, at least there should be political parties, the nature of which is destabilization. But the destabilization is not the final goal. The final goal is bringing to power, according to KGB and Russian doctrine. So understanding that, we also have to apply like a very, very general approach.
Thank you, Taras. Really insightful and a lot of food for thought to develop new strategies. I fully agree that we need workshops to build these bridges. Now, before we turn to our final speaker, I would like to ask the audience a question. Who of you have seen the movie Dark Knight Rises by Christopher Nolan? I know it's like based on comics, maybe not the best choice, but if you remember, there was a scene there where Batman meets Bane for the first time, and he tries to apply his tricks on him, and when Bane responds that theatricality and deception are powerful agents for the uninitiated, but we are initiated, aren't we, Natalie, this time?
Yes. Thank you. So, as being a proud member of the initiated community, I would like to advise you, should you, on your telephone, have TikTok, please do delete immediately. This is the end of this addendum. Yes, so it so happens that my previous employer was the European Value Center for Security Policy in Prague, where I spent most of my time monitoring influence operation, disinformation in the German language space. And God, did I have a lot to do. Mostly because the German government was in a kind of, I wouldn't even call that a late awakening. They were in a kind of hibernation. And, you know, like little children who close their eyes or they put their hands on their ears and say, I don't see, I don't hear anything. Disinformation and influence operation if you wanted to discuss this at governmental level, they would stare at you as if you were coming from McCarthy time, or you were looking for the Russians under your bed. They did not take you seriously. It took a lot of time and efforts for them to wake up. And when they woke up, and they woke up as a country very late, I think they were with the Austrians, the last one. I'm not sure the Austrians have woken up yet, but they were snowed under disinformation, and they didn't even notice. So operating this turf of countering disinformation was extremely difficult, and you couldn't do it from Berlin. Let's face it. You were not welcome if you wanted to have appointments with members of parliament. They would be busy with other things. And I like to give this example, but when somebody like Pushkov, who was under sanctions, came to Berlin, the entire city ran to have these breakfast backgrounders with Alexei Pushkov, who was under US sanctions. And I know I sound like a broken record, but having Vladimir Yakunin open his think tank, although he was under US scrutiny, later US sanctions, and then Canada sanctions, give him a work permit, and have him run a front operation, which is basically running influence operation, trying to win multipliers in Germany and create synergy in support of the Kremlin. And having all this without realizing that you are in the middle of a wide influence operation run by the Kremlin is quite alarming. Now you might wonder, my God, there are some professionals, they have intelligence agencies, haven't they seen anything? Well, yes, they have seen, and they have even documented. I mentioned the yearly reports of the Verfassungsschutz, which does the counterintelligence. You can read, except that there was no translation on the political level. Just like several intelligence agencies actually issued warning about the buildup around at the border. I mean, they had satellite, and they had human intelligence, and they had signals intelligence. But they were still members of the government, at least in Berlin, who were convinced that these were maneuvers. And because anything else was not politically possible in their heads. So why am I telling you this? It's not a problem of disinformation as such, and in the case of Germany specifically, the problem of influence operation and elite capture is relevant. It's also this incredible vulnerability of our political class. And the Russians do not need to do much. Because we are an open, first of all, we are democracy, so we are open societies, we don't use censorship, etc., etc. But most of all, there is an unwillingness to politically make the right decisions to would hurt. That leads back to what I said on the other panel. The Estonians were really yelling from the beginning. And the reception they got in these circles in Berlin, what those are Russophobes. They are from another time. It's the Soviet problem, you know. They have, and the German political class was convinced to know better. Was convinced that they had these privileged relationships to Moscow. So now you're a security official, and you have all this data, and you put it on the table, and you have on the other side people who think, oh, well, maybe we engage them and we create bilateral codependency, so we'll be dependent on them for oil, but they will depend on us for transfer of technology and money, so it will be all fine. And if you have a chancellor who is brought to believe that, I'm putting it very, very diplomatically here, you can do whatever you want as a security official. You're not going anywhere. So this explains that. Now, I'm happy to have somebody from Stop Fake here, because there is something I wanted to add. I've worked with them. I've worked with them on several issues, and since you've been given showcase, I wanted to give you one. We had the case last year of a French citizen called Adrien Bocquet. And I'm a French native speaker, so I watch also French media. And Adrien Bocquet was not only very present in French media, but he was also very present in German media, and specifically in very conservative media. Adrien Bocquet claimed to, he was a former soldier in the French armed forces who joined a humanitarian mission to Ukraine, traveled to Ukraine, and claimed to have witnessed atrocities by Azov. And he toured the talk shows in France and in Germany with always the same line. Except that in Germany, he obviously knew which button to push. And in Germany, the Azov issue is very important because of the political sensitivity and the historical dimension of the issue. And so we have all kinds of details about tattoos of the Azov soldiers, of course, swastikas, and of course they were all Nazis, etc., etc. And I happen to have followed the interviews. And so I reached out to Yevgeny at that time, and they were on it already from the French turf, which they observed. And here is what Stop Fake managed to do. So this is why when I say, what do you advise to your Ukrainian friends in terms of countering disinformation, I answer, well, it's pretty much like if I said to Garry Kasparov, hey, this is the way you should win your next game. It's quite ridiculous as a German citizen. Anyway, our Ukrainian friends manage, like Sherlock Holmes, to trace back the entire trajectory of Adrien Bocquet from France. He comes from a middle of nowhere corner, throughout Europe, knowing where they stopped, where they bought gas for the convoy, where they did their deliveries, how many kilometers, where he slept. And then they compared to where Azov was. And you do the math. It was nowhere near. So, of course, all this was debunked, and he was confronted by journalists of Libération, I think in France, and on the German side as well. And now popcorn, everyone. You know where Adrien Bocquet is now? Yes, he lives in Russia. So I rest my case.
Surprise. Natalie, I actually wanted to ask you what would be your best advice for Ukrainians, but you answered that question already. And I would like then to conclude this panel. It's been a fantastic setup. It's only the start of the what I believe must be a long-term cooperation between not just Ukrainian and Syrian civil societies, but from the civil societies from all the world, because we are facing with an existential threat, not we as Ukrainians, but the free people of all the world. Democracy is in danger, and that danger is amplified by the digital technologies and by the ever-improving arsenal of the disinformationers. We must unite to respond to that threat, and I would like to very much thank the organizers of this conference for setting the platform for this discussion. Thank you very much, and see you in about 15 minutes for the next panel.